Welcome back to Breaking Down Storage Tech. Today we're breaking down the Zhan Miss input uh, from the Zhan Miss, and this is the part 2. So let me just quickly run through some credits. We have the input designed by Rapscallion, the unpacking done by JRubik, and the whole of it together, obviously put together by siderXD. So let's get into it. So we started off, or we finished off the last part where we just finished. We have taken an input, we have sorted through it, we've broken the box, or sorry, we've broken the box up here, got all of its items out, and made all the carts and stuff, and we've sorted out our unstackables. So all right now we have is shulker boxes, and the shulker boxes are coming down this way up into here and into this hopper like so. And this is where we're going to sort between our full boxes and our empty or partially full boxes. Now, what is this system right here? Well, this is a full box checker. And you might say, why do we bother with the extra processing time of having a full box checker? Well, it's because of the size of the system, you could say, quote unquote, because in bigger systems, for example, in Kaizen's main storage, and I also think the Krebs main storage, but I'm not too sure about that one, but what's become pretty standard now is to have two inputs, one for regular items and one for bulk shulker boxes, all of one type. So we can immediately input it into the bulk. Now, the reason we do this is because why would we waste time, for example, if we had a farm, for example, for redstone blocks with the new crafter, what we can do is, why would we waste the time of unloading this entire shulker box just to repackage it in another shulker box like that one right there, and then put it back in the slice? That just is such a tedious little thing for something that we realistically should have another line for. So in modern storage or main storages that are pretty massive, we have a separate input to send it directly to the box sorter, and then we separate the box loader below and then send it down the same input. This allows for really simple input of bulk storage because we can just immediately put it there. So for example, or I don't have anything loaded into this thing in this bulk, but what would happen is we would just immediately get the shulker box in the chest that we wanted. Now, in this system, we don't have that luxury because the main goal is for it to be a mid-tier storage system, or a storage system between not having a storage system and your main storage, or a single player, just something more simple. So we don't have the luxury of having box loaders and then a separate box sorter for the bulk. So what we do is we try and circumvent this by sorting full boxes. Because then what happens is 9 times out of 10, they're going to be full boxes of the same type. Because if you look at most data sets or item sets that you see from regular survival play, they're not completely full. And so we'll get placed into this box right here where we have full box checkup, and we can either put them in manually to the system, or if they are a full box that occurred randomly of different items, we can just take out a stack and then put the shulker box and the separate stack into the chest and just run that as so. And that turns out to be way more of a time save for processing time because we don't have to sort through bulk boxes. Now, this is personal preference, but I just think it is a quite smart use of resources given the scale, and it just shows how well this system was thought out. So how does this actually work? Well, once the box gets placed in this hopper right here, we have a comparator taking outputs from it to then power this block right here. Powering this block extends this sticky piston right here to push this note block in front of this observer to cause an output to power this observer line right here, where we power this block, powering the dispenser and the piston at the same time. And so what ends up happening is it powers the piston, it extends and then comes back, and then it places the shulker box through the dispenser because the hopper just routes into the dispenser. And then on the second moving back of this note block from the unpowering of the comparator and the second firing of this signal is when we use the piston to actually break the box and push it into the soul sand into this hopper right here. Now the observer line does continue all the way over here to power this block, powering this note block, powering this observer to then power this repeater, powering this observer, powering this block right here, which powers the dropper and these two droppers with the use of this note block to instant dropper line in this case, and then just regular dropper output them into the respective systems. And we use the repeater here to make sure it only gets one signal. But how do we differentiate from a full box versus a empty or partially full box? Well, we place the box, and this is where this sneaky little comparator comes in right here. And as you can see, it's in compare mode, and we have a signal strength of 15 coming from this block of redstone. A trend you might remember from earlier with this exact same combo. So what happens is only if the box is completely full will this give out a signal. And this then goes into many lines, as you can see right here, of it powering this block to then power this note block as well as this note block, which goes into this observer line down here to power this block, this piston extending to then go to this observer line right here to go to this block, this piston line extending to go to this block, going into two separate lines to go to this block and then this hopper. And why do we do this? Well, these are all precisely staggered, so after about 2 ticks, I believe, as you can see, the shortest line, which is this line right here, is going to take 4 ticks, to then lock this hopper. So in 4 ticks, this hopper will get locked, and we do this just by staggering all of the outputs of the observers by using essentially an observer line through here. We use the delay of the piston to add some delay onto this. So that'll be actually the first one. Then we'll have the added delay of the second observer going to this block. Then we have the instant line going here for then the third observer to go here. And then we have 4 observers to go to the hopper. And then we have the unpowering of these pistons right here to send additional signals of an instant line, and then 3 and then 4. As well as the unpowering of this note block sending the 2 ticks. So it's actually 16 ticks now that I think about it because of all the timings. And this causes a nice 16 tick to prevent or to lock this hopper. So that way this hopper has time to push the full shulker box into this dropper, where it just makes its way down this line right here, where it gets pushed all the way up. And because if you note, that first of all, it gets pushed into this corner, and then this corner, we get it in this corner right here, this back right corner. So it goes all the way nice and smooth up. And this is where we see the recycling of these same lines again. But what ends up happening is it comes all the way up here, hits this iron trapdoor, and makes its way down here to go down into the full box checkup. Now, if the item isn't part of that, what happens is the item just gets pushed down through this dropper line up to this soul sand and gets pushed here. And this is where we again use the same water column. But this time, because we're pushing it against this block rather than this block, or this side versus this side, it comes all the way up here and it's get pushed into this hopper right here. Now, this becomes a little bit of a temp storage because we can go through boxes up here way quicker than we can unload them, depending on fill size, but most likely that will be the case. This little temp storage goes down into this hopper to load this dispenser right here. And this is where we get the fullness check from before coming into play. So essentially, if there is 11 entities on this pressure plate, so we don't run the risk of despawning, we use the heavy weighted pressure plate to power this block and lock this hopper, preventing any items from this line right here coming down through this shulker box unloader and coming their way into the main line to go onto this heavy weighted pressure plate. And this essentially stops one of the inputs, so we can slow down, work our way through the pile that's built up here through the minecarts coming like so. Now, another check we have is for if this isn't enough. If we're just inputting so many items from the cart yeeting at the initial user input, we have another failsafe. So after 11 entities, I believe it is, this line gets powered and locks up this hopper. But beyond that, on the next level of signal strength 3, because we pass on the signal to this comparator onto this block, we have another signal strength 2 check, which isn't too important, but here, this comparator passes the signal here, we have a signal strength 3 check. And if it does hit signal strength 3, we'll power this block, powering this line of repeaters to power this block to give us the sign of stopping input. And if the user doesn't do the stop input, we also have a failsafe of this redstone torch unpowering, retracting this block that I was talking about at the very beginning of the video, allowing this line right here or this line to replace hopper or minecart with the chests that basically act as the player's input. We just completely disable that ability. So at worst, we get one more full chest of items and we work our way through that, and then everything will be restored back to normal. Now, if that isn't the case, the items will pass to this dispenser like so, through this hopper, and we get a output to this comparator right here. Now, this comparator, as well as powering this note block right here, what we also do is act as another input to this overflow line, where we make sure that this dispenser isn't too full using the same signal strength 3 check. So that way we can work our items through at a timely pace. Because if you think about it, what ends up happening is each time a box gets placed, we're working through them at an insane rate, as you see using hopper minecarts, and dispensing all of those items onto this heavy-weighted pressure plate. So we really don't want a huge buildup of here that it can just work through. We want to pause that as quickly as possible before it gets too bad. Now, when powering this note block, it extends this redstone block right here to allow this line to then unpower, which will then unpower this block right here to power this dispenser right here through the use of this redstone torch, as well as unpower this redstone torch, allowing this piston to retract and us to place the shulker box. Now, the shulker box will then be read by this comparator, taking an output to this note block right here and this dropper right here. But essentially, it'll be used to clear the previous thing, or the empty shulker box before it, as well as when this repowers to power this note block to power this dropper. But essentially what happens is by this unpowering, we start a clock right here of this note block right here being unpowered, this observer detecting it, powering both of these dropper and dispenser, which will then update this observer to power the block and then continue the cycle like so. And how or why we do this is because we're placing a ridiculous amount of hopper minecarts on this rail right here to just suck every single item out of that shulker box as quickly as possible. The carts then make their timely way down this activator right here before getting yeeted quite quickly. Now the item itself, the minecart with hopper item itself, gets pushed into this bubble vader, where it can just come back and make its way into these two hoppers again to be recycled. And then what ends up happening is the items gets glitched under this chest and make their way down our main item input to get recycled onto the iron pressure plate. And now you can see why we have so many fail safes and safe for this pressure plate. Because of the insane rate, I have broken down a similar unloader to this, or shulker box unloader like this, using yeeting or minecart yeeting, hopper minecart yeeting, and it's just absurd the rate you can get, because each one of these hopper or minecart with hoppers is pulling at 8 times hopper speed, and then you just do all of these minecart with hoppers, you get quite a ridiculous rate. And then you run that at the rate of this clock right here, you get a really insane rate of minecart. Now we do something quite interesting when it comes to the powering of this piston right here, where we actually use a separate kind of clock, I guess you could say, and we separate it completely from the fillless level of the shulker box. And what we end up doing is having this redstone, or having the signal come from this redstone line, or redstone comparator going to this redstone line, to then repower the piston, breaking the shulker box, placing it in here to go into the dropper and be dispensed, as I was talking, or dropped, that is the more proper term, as I previously talked about. But that's because this is so insanely fast that what ends up happening is we go through a full shulker box that quickly, or technically not a full shulker box, but the limit of before it becomes a full shulker box. So I think it is 1727 item, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Now, as for the items, they just make their way down the main line as I was talking about previously, but the shulker box itself, once it's empty, it gets spit down into this line right here, and we use the momentum we gather from this line right here to get shot across this bubble column up into somewhere near this trap door, and then pushed all the way against here, because it will gain upward momentum from the bubble column, but it has such speed that it can cross this one block gap and make its way down into this line right here, where it just continues, gets pushed against this plane, and we use the waterlogging in the stairs to push it against this back right corner. Once then here, we reuse the same line as we talked about before for the unstackables, but this time for shulker boxes by pushing it into this corner, where it just gets pushed all the way here into the honey block to get picked up and sorted into the empty shulker box chest. And that's how we sort all of these 4 different items, or sorry, 3 different ones: the unstackable, full box checkup, and the shulker box itself, as we've gone through basically the entire system. Now, technically, there is one very last thing I would like to talk about, and that is the chunk loading of the system, because it is a dynamically chunk loaded system. And this is where the chunk alignment, as you saw, or as you can see right now, comes into play. As if I just turn on chunk borders, we have this chunk aligned here. Now, if we go down into this chunk, we see that there is a nether portal perfectly aligned, as you can see, within this chunk. And that's important because, as you can see, it occupies a 3x3 chunk area very beautifully. Now, the reason we do this is because a single portal, when an item or entity goes through it, it loads a 3x3 chunk area for a given amount of time. And so what we do is we actually make this dynamic by taking an output from a very unique place. And that unique place is the backup of chest or minecart with hoppers, this chest with minecart with hoppers, which is the whole storage. And this is where the creator was very proficient in their signage to make sure this doesn't get backed up, because we need exactly this amount as well. So this dispenser, this hopper, and this chest full, so that way as soon as we take out one, this chest remains with that gap as long as they're continuously being used, so we can detect that. How we do this is we have a chest right here, or the comparator right here, reading from the chest, which is getting a signal strength of 15 from this redstone block, to then run this line right here and keep this block, keeping the smoke block powered, keeping this redstone or block of redstone connected to the sticky piston extended. Now, if one was to go away, for example, the input from the side would be stronger. So what then ends up happening is we turn off this line, turning all of this, bringing this redstone block back up. Now we then activate this wire, which runs this pulse extender right here, which another bonus thing is that it powers this torch line to go all the way up here to then power this torch, powering this torch line going all the way up to this block right here to go to this line, which powers this line right here, which powers the working light, as well as powering through this line all the way here, all of the hopper locking for the slices. Through this main line, as you can see right here, and all of this hopper locking gets done at the end. Apart from that, this acts as a pulse extender because we're keeping the same signal alive because we're passing the same signal through. So this will just get a signal strength of 15. But once this gets powered, this also unpowers this redstone torch right here, turning off this redstone dust right here, which causes two main things to happen. This block causing both of them by unpowering causes this redstone torch to power on, triggering this little clock right here. As you can see, we use the same 2 dust trick to continue or to prolong the dust. So basically every 2, 4, 6, 8 game ticks, the signal strength will go down by 1. And what ends up happening is this line goes to this block to power this dispenser right here, which should be filled with items. And what ends up happening is, or boats, sorry, the boat will get placed in this water and then go through the portal and load the chunks when it comes back. And then it can get broken on the other side and dropped into these glitched minecart with hoppers to then be passed to this hopper line right here. And this basically means that you can use this portal, because it's just a boat coming through every once in a while, we can use this portal for our main storage portal as well. Now, what also happens is we unpower this, or power this note block, unpower this note block. And when this gets unpowered, jumping back a little bit in time, so what happens is this dropper will then no longer be powered, but then it will repower really quickly from this redstone torch. We're using that signal to only send 1 pulse to this observer, causing this observer chain to go all the way here to power this block and run this little line right here to get a signal strength of 1 to pull or to be subtracted by giving a signal strength 15 in the back and subtracting a signal strength of 14 coming from this redstone block. Powering this dust and then power this dust, we basically take away a signal strength of 1. So every time this clock completely runs out, which is 15 times 8 game ticks, this clock will go down by 1. So that basically gives us 15 times that. So 15 squared times 8 game ticks is how many game ticks this entire thing will be on. And we do this just so we keep the chunks loaded for well beyond the system returning all of its hopper minecarts, so that way we can pass the items all the way through up here. And that is the dynamic chunk loading. It's kind of separated from the active clock that runs the minecarts, but that's because the minecarts for maximum speed have to run on 14 game ticks and definitely not 15 squared times 8 game ticks. And it would be kind of awkward to do the math to make this. However, my only comment is that this clock is quite large and definitely could be compacted in a manner, but it fits within the space and gets the signals to where it needs to go, so you can't really complain. But overall, that's pretty good for what it is. So overall, this system is really cool. It uses some nice little tricks such as cart eating shulker box unloading. It uses the fundamental principles of unstackable versus stackable sorting into a shulker box separator, into a full box detection, and all of that while running 2 clocks to then power the chunk unloaders, as well as running this line right here, which has all of the neat little logic to make these perfect carts in just this little bit right here. I think this input is very, very impressive. Now, my only comment is this UI right here. I'm not the biggest fan of inputting minecarts with a chest or having this. I prefer to have either a barrel or a chest. That's being really, really nitpicky for what you get, because this thing is a absolute beast with a ton of safety features that make it quite user-friendly. So I can see that, yeah. But yeah, overall, a really, really cool system. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.